I think we can get started. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people, depending on where you are, and welcome to the MLC's webinar on the Data Quality Initiative. In terms of an agenda for today, we'll start with some introductions to the people that will be presenting. We will then talk a little bit about sort of the purpose of the DQI and the target audience. We'll then move on to talk a little bit about getting data together that you will need to participate in the DQI. We'll then talk about how you might actually submit that data in a file to the DQI, and then finally what you get back in return. There's then a very short section on next steps. And I think we should have a good amount of time for any questions. If you do have any questions, please do type them in the Q&A box rather than the chat, and we'll be happy to answer as many as we can when we get to that section of the presentation. Before we begin, I just want to help make sure that everybody is at the webinar that is most helpful for them. So 2 weeks ago, we ran a webinar targeted at people who are sort of managing their musical works data using their own in-house systems that developed themselves, proprietary systems, or what have you. Just making sure that people are aware, just in case that webinar sounds like it may actually be perhaps more relevant to them than this one. Similarly, 1 week ago, we ran a webinar for users of Vistex's Music Maestro platform. So again, if there are any people on today's webinar that are Music Maestro users, it may be that you get more value out of that webinar than out of this one. If either of those webinars sound like they are helpful to people, please drop us an email at that data.quality@themlc.com address, and we will be very happy to provide you with a link to the recording of the webinar. So today's webinar is targeted at people who are sort of managing a catalogue of musical works, whether they be music publishers, administrators, self-administered songwriters, but people who are using things like Microsoft Excel, Google Sheets, Apple's Numbers, or sort of those sorts of methods to manage the data on their musical works. And I will also just say that this webinar is also being recorded, and again, a copy of or the link to the recording will be available to anybody that wants it. If you email us, we're happy to send you that. While we're talking webinars, I just very quickly want to plug also a webinar series that will be launched next month, targeted primarily at self-administered songwriters. I don't have any more detailed information on that at the minute, but I would just encourage you to go to our website, themlc.com, and sign up for our mailing list there. And as soon as more information on those webinars becomes available, we will let you know. So just moving into some quick introductions. My name is Richard Thompson. I am the CIO of the MLC. I have been working with and on the MLC project for a little over 18 months now, so even before the MLC was designated. And I'm joined today by a long-time colleague, Raphael, who is helping the MLC out with any number of technical things, and he will take over as we get into the sort of more technical bit of the presentation. If you want to reach us after the presentation with any comments, questions, what have you, again, same email address, data.quality@themlc.com. That is the best email address because there are a few people that are monitoring that mailbox. So it is the best way for you to get a quick response. So let's dive in properly to sort of the purpose of the DQI and sort of the target audience and what have you. And I began about 3 slides ago by saying that today's webinar is targeted at sort of music publishers and or administrators and or self-administered songwriters. And I just sort of want to call attention that that's actually a pretty diverse audience that we are speaking to today. And actually it's diverse in some other dimensions as well. So as well as I'm sure we have publishers and administrators and songwriters on the call, we will also have people that are managing their data in a number of different ways. So I've already sort of spoken to Excel and Google and numbers, but there may be people that have created sort of some databases in things like Microsoft Access or FileMaker Pro or Quattro Pro or other similar applications. So we're going to do our best to sort of try to address at least the Excel sheets and numbers dimension of that and cover that off as best we can. Similarly, I think we'll have a significant diversity of catalogue size on today's webinar. I mentioned that, and I also mentioned in the bottom left, I've sort of talked about that there will be people that have been working with HFA up until today, and there will be people on the call that have not been working with HFA in any dimension up until today. And I mentioned those things because, and I just need to be sort of honest about this, that the DQI may not be the right thing for everybody on this call. It may be that there are the next steps for some people on this call are actually to do something else, and I will speak to that a little bit more as we sort of go through the presentation in 2 or 3 places. Yeah, I just want to sort of explicitly call out, as I say, it may be that the DQI does not make sense for everybody, and that people may actually need to do something different in terms of of their next steps in terms of the interaction with the MLC, as the MLC sort of slowly begins to operationalize in the coming weeks and months. So just wanted to provide that by way of context, but let's go back to what the DQI is fundamentally about. What are we trying to achieve? Well, I would say a key role, if not perhaps the first role, the most important role that any publisher or administrator of musical works or self-administered songwriter, in terms of their interaction with a CMO, a collective management organization, such as the MLC, or with ASCAP, or BMI, or CSAC, or any other sort of collective management organization, the key question is, are my works registered correctly? Because if those works are not registered correctly, bluntly, you're not going to get paid correctly on them. So it's really, really important to know that your works are correctly registered. And that question actually can be broken down by a few different dimensions. So, one way of thinking about is my work correctly registered is the payable percentage correctly? The payable percentage registered correctly. Does it match what I think the payable percentage should be? So, perhaps I think I represent 75% of the work. If the database at the CMO that I am talking to says 25%, then that's a problem. Somewhere, there is a 50% discrepancy there that needs to be looked at and understood and fixed. There are other ways of thinking about it as well. The questions like, is the ISWC present? The ISWC is the International Standard Work Code, which is a global standard used by societies, publishers, administrators, DSPs, labels, all over the globe to help them manage musical works. So that's another key. And there are some other, this is not at all intended to be a sort of a comprehensive or exhaustive list, just a couple of sort of things that spring to mind. So what does the DQI do? What is the purpose of it? And essentially the purpose is to give you, as a copyright administrator or somebody representing a catalogue of musical works, a streamlined way to compare the data that you have on those works with the data that the MLC has on those works, and then to tell you where those two don't match. So to my earlier example of 75%, 25%, if I made a submission to the data quality initiative and said, this is my view of my catalog, and for this work I believe I represent 75%, but the MLC database says 25%, that is a discrepancy. And what the DQI will do is tell you about that discrepancy, so that then you can look into it. Because it may be that the 75% is correct, it may be that the 25% is correct. It's also possible that neither are correct. Maybe the correct answer was 50. But until somebody looks into it, all we know is that those two things don't match. And we need to find a resolution, whether it be fixing my own database or getting the MLC database fixed. One or both of those actions is likely going to be necessary. That being said, a key principle here is that what we can do is help you find those discrepancies. But as I say, that the DQI tool, the tool that we have built that identifies these discrepancies, can figure out that there is a discrepancy, but it can't figure out which of those numbers is right, whether it should be 75% or 25% or neither of the above. So we can highlight the discrepancies, but we cannot fix them for you. And that is where we need rights holders of all shapes and sizes, whether they be major publishers, large independent publishers, small independent publishers, self-administered songwriters, international CMOs, people representing estates of musical works, whoever it is. We are asking everybody to come and sort of play your part in helping us find any discrepancies that exist and helping us eliminate them. Now, to my earlier observation about the diversity of people that we have on this webinar, I'm reasonably sure that some of the people on this webinar will be going, well, hang on, this doesn't make sense to me, because I know nothing about registering works at the MLC. And what I believe most people are aware, but if you're not aware, let me just remind people now that HFA, the Harry Fox Agency, and the MLC are going to be accessing the same database of musical works. So to the point I had on the slide earlier about diversity, there will be people that have been working with HFA and have been registering their works at HFA. Equally, there will be some people on the webinar that have not. So if you have not, as yet, been registering your works with HFA, and clearly you cannot yet have been registering your works with the MLC, then right now, I would say the DQI is not the right avenue for you to begin engaging with the MLC. In the coming weeks, the MLC will be sort of beginning to ramp up its operations, the thing I would encourage you to do right now would be to go to the MLC's website, sign up for the newsletter, and as and when we begin sort of operations for people that have not yet registered their works with either HFA or the MLC, as soon as that opportunity becomes available, we will let you know. I would just also, by way of saying that, sort of emphasize there is no need to panic in terms of the urgency. It is still August. We are not going to use any of this data until approximately February at the earliest, so we still have 6 months. There is still plenty of time. There is no rush, no panic. As I say, we are just very slowly beginning to sort of start up operations now and making sure that we do that in a very sort of intentional and sustainable and manageable way. So there will be ample opportunity to get your works registered in the coming months. I hope I spoke to that clearly and that that made sense to everybody. If I didn't, as I say, please drop a question into the Q&A, and happy to pick that topic up in the Q&A section at the end. But for now, I will begin to sort of move into the sort of the section about pulling your data together, so that we can begin to describe how you can interact with the DQI, how you can participate. So one of the really key principles about a sort of an initiative that calls itself the Data Quality Initiative is that it has to be accurate. It is no good as providing you a discrepancy report that is wrong. That is not helpful. So one of the very key principles is that we rely at the moment exclusively on work identifiers, and the two work identifiers that we do that are the HFA song code, or certainly what previously will be known to many people on the webinar as the HFA song code. That is the same thing as the MLC song code. There was no point us inventing a new work identifier just for the sake of inventing another work identifier. So we are using exactly the same work identifier as HFA. We just call it the MLC song code. But please don't be confused. It is the same thing as the HFA song code. So that is one of the first two identifiers that we can use. Or secondly, as I mentioned above, the ISWC, the International Standard Work Code. And just to re-emphasize, so what we do not attempt to do in processing files that come in sort of from representatives of copyright is do any sort of string matching or anything like that, because by its nature, that string matching introduces an error rate of its own. So we are trying to remain 100% accurate, and therefore that is why we are relying exclusively on identifiers. So some people on the call, I'm sure, will be wondering how they get hold of those identifiers, and there's a few options that will be available to people to do that. Firstly, I should say I'm making the assumption that there will be some people on the webinar that will have a good selection of these codes, given that they will, perhaps they've been working with HFA and HFA have been returning codes to them as part of the work registration process or as part of royalty files. And similarly with ISWCs, HFA will have been returning those to people registering with them, or also returning them as part of the royalty statement. So I'm hopeful that a good percentage of people on the webinar have some of these codes already. If you don't, or if you need to fill some gaps, a couple of places that you can do that. In the coming weeks, the MLC will be launching its sort of public search. For those who are familiar with the ASCAP and BMI websites, they have similar functionality where you can go onto the ASCAP website or the BMI website and search their database of musical works. We are building something very, very, very similar to that. So you can see a sort of an early screenshot over on the right-hand side of this, where I looked for Hey Jude by Lennon McCartney, and you can see there that the MLC song code H42000. And if the ISWC had been known, we would also have displayed that as well. So that's one place that you can get MLC song codes. But equally, again, for people that have been working with HFA, it is, I believe, possible to look them up on the HFA portal as well. And then in terms of ISWCs, I don't know if people know, and I will include that URL in the email that we will send out to everybody at the conclusion of the webinar. But there is also a public lookup of ISWCs. And again, another screenshot of it. So in this case, I got hold of the IPI name number for Ryan Teller, just randomly chosen, and we can see there are 151 works known to the central ISWC database that Ryan Teller has written, along with the ISWCs listed here down the left-hand side. So that is another avenue for people to get hold of identifiers, and as I say, the ISWC in particular is very helpful to people because it is used by ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and societies around the world. So it is a very, very helpful identifier to have. So then, and Raf will talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but when we were designing the DQI, we wanted to make sure that we gave some really, really good reporting back to people. And in particular, we wanted to make sure that that reporting was as actionable as possible, so that we provide you information you can do something with, when you can understand what the discrepancy is between the between your view of the musical work and between the MLC's database. So hopefully we've achieved that, and that the information provided on the report is really actionable. But equally, we've done our very best to sort of try and make it accessible, so that hopefully the report that comes back is easy to understand and sort of clearly highlights the problems. And Raf will talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment or two. I just want to, I hope this has come through, but I just want to sort of emphasize that submissions to the DQI are not a work registration. Submissions to the DQI are essentially a request for comparison between the data you provide, so the data that has come from your Excel sheet or your FileMaker Pro database, and the MLC's database. So submitting files to the DQI will not constitute a work registration. You will need, again, for people that have been working with HFA, carry on registering works however you are registering works for the time being. The DQI is not a work registration. So with that, I will turn it over to Raf, who will go through a little bit more practical information about how to actually submit files for comparison. Over to you, Raf.
Hi, everyone. As Richard said, we want this tool, or this suite of tools, to be available to everyone and really be easily accessible, easy to understand, and easy to use. So for that purpose, we've designed a number of templates, which I'll go through in a second. The other thing that's worth noting is it only requires the bare minimum data that is required to manage and administer compositions. So anyone that administers publishing rights on behalf of songwriters or other publishers should have that information in their system. Next slide, please. So the templates that we've created today are in either Microsoft Excel for Excel users, Apple Numbers for Mac users, and Google Sheet for a more open source approach. The templates are ready to be used, and they will be distributed by email after the webinar. We've set up a Google Drive area where everybody will be able to download and clone those templates before they are returned to us. So this is not the template, but it's an overview of what actual information is required in each of those templates. So first thing to note is for each composition, you only are required to input one row. And each row should contain a primary title, which is the title of the work that you're submitting to the DQI. The list of writer names, and we're not really using the information other than for disambiguation purpose. So it's really intended to be human readable, and you can separate the writer names in any way you like. Next field, which would be good to have, is ISWC. So ISWC is the standard code for compositions. If you have it, please supply it to us. It helps us make sure that we're matching to the correct composition. If not, it's not a big deal. We can always use the HFA song code if it's available. So to be able to match your work to our database, we need one or the other. If we don't have any, unfortunately, we can't actually find your works. So the HFA song code is the song code as provided by HFA. Next field is what we've called the member work identifier. It is essentially the way you identify your composition in your system. In the context of a spreadsheet, if you're not using an identifier, we would suggest that when you fill out any of the DQI template that you just use a sequence number. This will be helpful to you when you read the reports, go through the report and try to link works where we've identified issues to works that were submitted to us originally. And finally, which the last column, which is the most important bit of information, the collection share. So this is the share, the US mechanical percentage of the work that's licensable, collectible, that you're expecting to be paid on for all the controlled writers or various rights holders on that composition. We're expecting it as a whole number. So if it was 66.67%, just input 66.67. Next slide, please, Rich. So once you've filled out the template, the way to deliver it to us involves first exporting the data. We're not able to read the data directly from the spreadsheets or from the Google Sheets. So we would like you to export first the file into a tab separated value or TSV from templates. And I'll go through a demonstration on how to do that with each of the software in a second. Once you've exported the files, they can be delivered to the MLC in, well, one of two ways today, but three ways possibly in the future. Via email, and obviously we would require you to make sure that you're clearly identified on the email so we know who those compositions belong to. SFTP is also a way to deliver the data to us. It's a bit faster because the whole process is then automated and doesn't require any human intervention. It's a bit more complex because it requires a bit more technological know-how, but I have some good instructions on how to get set up for an SFTP account. And finally, once the MLC portal is live and in the near future, we're hoping to make the functionality available through the portal. So once you've submitted the data to us and we've processed the data, like Richard said, we want to give you a report that's useful and really actionable. The idea is, again, to prepare your data and be ready for when the MLC starts licensing and processing usages and ensuring that you're being paid the right amount. So there are two reports coming out of the DQI. One which is a summary report which lists each issues detected and the number of occurrences for each. And a more detailed report which lists detailed issues for each work. And as part of the detailed report, we're also able to provide additional information. So, for example, and I'll go in more details in a bit, but if you were to give us the HFA song code and we find the ISWC in our database, we can give it back to you, no problem. And again, the idea is that those reports are easily usable, easily accessible, and easy to read. So they're again in tab separated value format. So they can be read by a computer system, a computer program, but they can also be easily opened in Excel, Google Sheets, or even Apple Numbers. And here are some of the issues that we're reporting on today. It's worth noting that the DQI is very much an evolving tool, and we've made best guesses as to what is useful to the users. But if you have feedback, if you have things that you would like us to track, please send us your feedback to the usual email address that we've already repeated a number of times. And we'll try to incorporate your suggestions to the DQI. But today, so for example, we're reporting discrepancies on collection shares, so when collection shares do not match. And because there are various reasons as to what that could happen, we're breaking it down into is the HFA share 0, which means that your work is not actually registered with HFA. Is the HFA share greater than the share that you supplied to us, in which case it could point to maybe an LD that's not been processed or any sort of registration issues. Or the supplied share is greater than the HFA share, which could point, for example, to a dispute that's not been resolved yet. If you've supplied the ISWC or the HFA/MLC some code, we can validate that for you. So if the supplied code is not in the format that we would expect it, we can flag it to you, and then you can research it and fix it, or remove it from your system or your spreadsheet so that you ensure clean data. Finally, we can look at some codes that may refer to different works, or ISWCs that may refer to different work. That only applies if you decide to supply multiple HFA some codes for one of your work, or multiple ISWCs, which isn't quite suited to those formats, but in the slightly more evolved standard that we've built, that's a possibility. So if you would like to be able to use that, please speak to us and we can point you in the right direction. So as I said, we also provide additional data which you can make use of and ingest. So if, for example, you only supply the HFA song code, if we find the ISWC, we will provide it to you. Equally, if you only supplied an ISWC, we can send you back the HFA song code. When works are merged either in the ISWC system or in the HFA system, there's already a song code or an ISWC that persists, which is called archived. So if you supply us with the archived ISWC, we can provide you with the preferred one. Similarly, with the HFA song code, if you supply an archived song code, we can give you the preferred one. So I think before we go into the next step, I think it might be a good opportunity to demonstrate how you would export the data of the spreadsheet. And I might need to go and share my screen, Rich.
All yours.
Fantastic. So if we look at Excel to start with, so this is the template as it currently looks like, and as you can see, it's in my version of Excel. And to export it as TSV is very simple. You just go Save As and make sure that you select where is it? Tab delimited text, and just click Save. It's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Moving on to Google Sheets. And there it is. So again, similar template, similar columns. The functionality in Google Sheets is, oops, my apologies, download and tab separated values. So it will have a slightly different extension, but that doesn't cause us any problems. And finally, in Apple Numbers, there it is. Again, same template, same columns. This time, the way to export it is by going into File, Export to, and then TSV. And then the options are the same. You can include table names, but I wouldn't recommend it. And again, as simple as that. And back to you, Rich.
Thank you. So let's move on to next steps. So as hopefully we've both said at this point, or certainly Raf said, we welcome any suggestions for any improvements, changes, anything that we can do to help you in terms of your sort of participation in the DQI, or if you simply just want to provide some feedback to us, we'll be happy to listen to it. Same email address as before, data.quality@themlc.com, and we're very happy to look at that. Hopefully we have inspired some people that are on the webinar to get started, or maybe people have some questions or some feedback or what have you. As ever, same email address, data.quality@themlc.com. We'd be delighted to hear from you, delighted to help you, delighted to get you up and running, and yeah, let you begin sort of running the comparisons, as I say, between your view of the data and the MLC/HFA's view of the data. So with that, we can turn to some questions, and I can see people have been busy typing the questions to us. So in no particular order, let us begin answering them. So first question we've got, I think there are 2 or 3 questions looking up and down the list about sort of the HFA opt-in. That people I think will have seen in recent weeks, and hopefully everybody has opted into. The question coming off the back of that is, can I now find/create my account at themlc.com or not yet? Not yet is the answer. We are, I think, just a few weeks away now from having the portal ready for sort of public consumption, public use. We are currently in the middle of testing it, finding bugs, fixing bits and pieces, improving the text, changing the color scheme in places, just doing all of the things that is perfectly normal at this sort of stage of the software development life cycle to begin to get the MLC portal ready for rollout. So I think that's still a few weeks away. But that is sort of, at the risk of being a little vague, that is sort of the vaguish timeline that we are hopefully working towards, assuming no major bumps in the road. There will, to people that have sort of opted into that to that HFA opt-in, you will see communications beginning to come from the MLC on that will begin to explain more in the coming weeks. So that's that one. Next one, where does the MLC get its information about the songs? So as the MLC is sharing its database of musical works with HFA. So essentially, HFA therefore is the starting point for all of the data that we have, and we will be continuing to access the same database as HFA as we move forward. So that is where, at least initially, the MLC has, got all of its data from. But of course, as we move forward, there will be people, who are submitting works to the MLC, for example, via the portal. People will, of course, continue to submit works to HFA. And as I say, that they all go into a single database, which is being accessed by both HFA and the MLC. Because there is also a question in here on whether you will need to register with both the MLC and the HFA. No, is the answer to that. As I say, we are accessing the same database. So you will not need to register with both HFA and the MLC. A single registration to either HFA or the MLC will achieve the same objective in terms of getting the work into the database. Let's find another one. Excuse me, there's quite a lot of questions in here, so just trying to Raf, if you can see any to answer, then please jump in.
Sure. Someone asked a question around the difference between ISWC and ISRC. So ISWC is the International Standard Work Code, so a composition identifier. ISRC is the International Standard Recording Code, which is a recording identifier. So one has to do with publishing rights and the other one has to do with label and various recording rights.
Thanks, Raf. Another question, if I have ISWC codes but not HFA codes, is that enough? Or must I have HFA codes? Yes, ISWC codes are sufficient. The one caveat I will give to that is that it is obviously dependent upon them being populated in the HFA/MLC database for us to be able to match against them. So what I would encourage you to do, to the gentleman that asked that question, is get started. Submit to the DQI and we will match what we can. And more often than not, people find actually even taking that first step is pretty helpful. I don't know anything about the gentleman that's asked the question, so I don't know whether you're a sort of a songwriter or a publisher or an administrator, so I don't know what the size of your catalogue is, but I would say if you get started, particularly for sort of people with larger catalogues, generally speaking, what people that have participated in sort of the pilot phase as we were building the DQI have found is that more often than not, sort of finding a discrepancy in one part of your catalogue actually helps unearth other discrepancies. Perhaps if you're a publisher and you acquired a catalogue and you shifted that catalogue in by letter of direction, maybe not all of the works got transferred, or maybe there was some sort of issue with the letter of direction, or I don't know what. Perhaps the prior administrator didn't register all of the works correctly, so not everything was even in the catalogue to be transferred. So I would strongly encourage you to get started, because more often than not, as I say, finding one issue can quite often unearth problems that exist at the catalogue level and actually help you solve quite a lot of issues just by solving one issue, and in issues that you may not have been previously aware of. I should say discrepancies, not issues, but no, either an ISWC or an HFA song code are sufficient. If you've got both, great. Because if we have both, we will also do a cross-check to make sure that they are both identifying the same work and that nothing funny has happened there. What else have we got?
There was a question about timing of the DQI. So the DQI is live, and if you drop us an email on the data.quality email address, we can set you up and get you ready for processing the data as soon as you're ready to send it to us. We ran a pilot with a number of larger publishers because we wanted to make sure that we could take that sort of volume. But we are now very much live, ready and willing to take your data.
So we have another question here. What do you do if there are two or more ISWC numbers for the same work? So to the gentleman that asked that, there are two or three different, or at least two options I can think of for dealing with that. And again, I don't know the size of your catalogue, so I don't know which option makes most sense for you. But one option would be if you have a small enough catalogue to just go and look them up on the ISWC Net website that I highlighted earlier, and that will tell you for the work which is what's called the preferred ISWC, which is the one that you should ideally use, and which one or ones are the archived ISWC. Archived ISWCs are still perfectly valid. It's just that ideally they would be taken out of circulation and the preferred ISWC used instead. So that would be one option for you. Alternatively, if you have a larger catalogue and you want to explore some other options, I would say drop us an email, and there are some other avenues that we can probably look to help you focus on making sure that you're using sort of the preferred ISWC, or also making sure that if you have more than one ISWC for the same work, that it is actually referencing the same work. So there are some things that we can do there. I think that one's answered. Somebody says, is it correct that if our data is shared directly by HFA, then we wouldn't need to use DQI? Or could there be issues in the HFA data that the DQI could still pick up? So, I mean, participation in the DQI is optional, but I would very strongly encourage you to do it. And could there be issues in the HFA data that the DQI could pick up? Absolutely. I would say, you know, HFA is a large collective management organisation with a database of, I think, somewhere upwards of 30 million works and even more recordings, I'm sure. So with the best will in the world, the data in that database is not going to be perfect. Neither will it be at any large CMO anywhere in the world, because when you're dealing with that volume of data at any given moment in time, you know, say unfortunately, but inevitably, there are going to be some things that are not quite right. So I would very much encourage you to participate, and you may very well find some discrepancies in the data that you were previously unaware of. Raf, there's a question about a file extension. Is it a .txt extension or a .tsv extension that people should be using?
So ideally TSV. I haven't looked too much into Excel to see if it would do the TSV instead of the TXT extension. Again, work with what Excel gives you. If it becomes a problem, we'd rather have the data than have people stopping at the file extension. We can work around that. That's not a problem.
All right. There are a few questions sort of on the topic of affiliating with HFA, and I would say it's impossible for me to answer the question for each of you as to whether affiliating with HFA is the right move for you or not. You know, all of your individual circumstances are of course different, and even then it would probably not be appropriate of me to sort of, you know, give a recommendation one way or the other. I suppose what I can say is, you know, obviously if you think that is of interest, I'm sure there will be information on affiliating on the HFA website. Alternatively, you know, if that is something that probably doesn't make sense for you, then as I say, the MLC will be sort of beginning operations and beginning to slowly sort of roll out operations in the coming weeks. So if you choose not to affiliate with HFA, you will be able to begin to interact with the MLC in the coming weeks. Let's go and have a look at that. We've got about 5 minutes and then we need to call it, and I apologise because there are an awful lot of questions that we are not going to be able to get to.
So there's a question around whether the DQI will have alternative titles and writer info. So the template that I've showed is intended to keep things very simple. And that's why there's no fields to provide that information at this stage. If you want to provide more information like alternative titles and individual writer information, there are more evolved templates that we're using, which we can share, and you can decide if it's the right tool for you. As to whether they will be coming back, not at the moment. Writer info, absolutely. Alternative titles, we're not giving them back in the current report. The intention is very much to highlight issues and provide as much information as we can to fix those issues. Additional data, once the portal is live, will be available there.
So I've got a question. Did I hear/read that only one work can be submitted at a time for registration? Just first I want to emphasize that is a question about registration and not the DQI. So in terms of registration of works to the MLC, there'll be three main mechanisms. The first of those, for people wanting to sort of submit very large volumes, will be CWR, Common Works Registration. That is quite a complicated and technical layout that tends to be used by sort of larger publishers. There will then be an Excel template that people can complete, and that template will be will definitely be capable of holding multiple works at once. So yes, you will need to complete that template, and that template will contain will need a fair bit more information than the DQI does, just as a note. Alternatively, the third way to register works will be to do them one at a time on the portal. Again, it depends what the right thing for you is, and forgive me, without knowing detail of your catalogue, it's hard for me to comment on which of those mechanisms makes the most sense for you. That also answers that lady's question. Right, I think Raf can get one or two more done. So one question, is the MLC, and I assume this means work ID, specific to the MLC database, or is it borrowing it from the HFA database? We are sharing our work identifier with HFA. So on this webinar, you will, I think, probably variously have heard us referring to it as both the HFA song code and the MLC song code, or the HFA database or the MLC database. They are one and the same thing. Yeah, we are using the same work identifier as HFA. Do you have a date when the DQI will be ready for songwriters to start submitting? Ready today. We're happy to take submissions today. Right, one more, I think, and then I think we probably will need to call it a day. There are a couple of questions actually about sort of the broader industry environment. There's one here about, does the MLC replace Sound Exchange? No, absolutely not. Sound Exchange collects royalties for recordings, whereas the MLC collects on behalf of musical works. So if you are sort of putting recordings out into the marketplace, you will still need to be working with Sound Exchange to help to get them to help collect royalties for those. I apologise to everybody whose questions we didn't get to. There are a lot in here, but as I say, you can reach us at data.quality@themlc.com. I would say if everybody that has asked a question emails us, you might just need to give us a day or two to respond, because there are an awful lot of questions we didn't get to, so I apologise for that. But otherwise, I hope this was helpful to everybody. I hope that you are sort of going to be able to participate and sort of begin hunting for any discrepancies that exist between your data and the MLC's data. And we will be very happy to help you do that. So thank you all very much for your time and attention, very much appreciated, and thank you for the great questions as well. And we hope to hear from you soon.